2024 was the year I fell back in love with reading. Well, that's a slight lie. Let me explain. So I have always loved reading. I'm sure many of you watching can relate to me. I was a child who would have been described as a voracious reader, and I'm sure some of you would have been described the same way. Reading was pretty much all I did when I was little, and if I wasn't reading, I was writing stories. Those were my only two hobbies as a child. I loved to read. So here in the UK at primary school, it's definitely probably different now. I'm 28, I've been out of primary school for quite a long time and I don't have any children, so I'm not sure how it works entirely anymore. But in my primary school when I was a child, after we learnt, the very much basics like how to read the alphabet, read simple words, we were put on something called guided reading, where we could go and pick any book we wanted and we were told what colour book we could have. So each of the books on these massive shelves we used to have were a different coloured sticker, with the easiest books that we started with a white colour on the spine and the hardest books being a black sticker on the spine. And once we'd read all of the books, and there were a lot of books in my primary school, then we could come off guided reading and bring our own books to school. I was the first child in my class to pick from the white books because I learned how to read the quickest, and I was also the first person to finish all of the books just after I turned 8 years old, even though I was the youngest in the class. I just loved reading so much, and I threw myself into it even more when my parents got divorced when I was around 7 years old. Honestly, I don't remember much of the divorce itself, but I do remember reading. Reading a lot. However, my love for reading really changed when I was around 14 years old. I didn't know this at the time, but I am actually autistic. I didn't get diagnosed until just before turning 19. And at 14, honestly, I didn't know very much about autism. I didn't even really know what it was, and I wouldn't have labelled myself as autistic. I would have just said I was shy and introverted. I wouldn't have labelled myself as autistic even if I had known more about it. But I think what was happening to me at the time was autism burnout. I'd really thrived in my primary school, which was a smaller class size of around like 36 of us, and I knew everyone in the entire school, all the teachers, all the other students, even the new ones coming in and the old ones leaving. I knew everyone. But high school in the UK is very, very different, and I definitely felt my lacking social skills were much more obvious at high school rather than primary school, and I just really didn't fit in, like, at all. And because I didn't have either a diagnosis or even just like an inkling that there was something going on, autism or otherwise, I just basically thought there was something wrong with me because I'm not like everyone else in the rest of my year group. As a result of being so different, because no matter how hard I masked, it just didn't work, I couldn't fit in with people, I got made fun of quite a lot. I always looked quite serious a lot of the time because I felt like I couldn't be myself, and there was, for some reason, and I still don't get it, a running joke that I liked classical music, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way. If you like classical music, that's great, but I didn't. And I got told I was lying whenever I would express an interest in liking things that were more mainstream, which at the time were things like One Direction and Doctor Who, which at the time I truly did like both of those things. And I also got made fun of quite badly whenever people found out I had feelings for one of the boys in my year, as if I wasn't capable of having romantic feelings towards anyone. And then the boy in question, even though he didn't like me back, would also get made fun of too, and he would just stop talking to me. And as you may have guessed, getting made fun of for no real reason, I wouldn't have minded if I'd done something wrong, but I hadn't done anything. I also got made fun of for reading too. Other people in my year and in the school at large, at high school, read a lot too, but I really seemed to be the only target. There's a phenomenon known as the uncanny valley effect, where unease is felt by a human when they see someone who resembles a human, but for some reason they don't feel they are quite human. You may experience this personally if you see like a human image generated by AI, or perhaps a video game character who is meant to look human, and they're very close, but there's just something off about them, and sometimes you can work out like, oh well, their nose is a bit weird, or one of their ears is quite definitely bigger than the other, but sometimes you just can't quite put your finger on it. This feeling is also said to be felt around autistic people too, because we often mask and try to fit in, but we can't always manage it. Or our facial expressions or our way of reacting just doesn't come across as normal or what other people would class as authentic, leading to autistic people to be bullied or ridiculed or ostracised, which for the record I think it's awful. It's terrible, but that seemed to be what was happening to me in high school, even though I had really no idea what was going on. In primary school, because I read so much, I sometimes got called Hermione Granger as a nickname because I read a lot and because my hair is dark brown, kind of wavy / curly / frizzy / whatever it is that's going on with Hermione's hair from the books, which was similar to Emma Watson's in the films. I liked being called that in primary school. I got called that too in high school. It wasn't meant as a compliment in high school. All of that was just too much, plus with me struggling to adapt, it just made me stop reading books, or at least not read as many. I read the books we had to read for English class, like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Hound of the Baskervilles, but past that I just pretty much wouldn't read for pleasure anymore. The only books I really remember reading in high school were the Harry Potter books when they came out, and that was pretty much it. I used to go with my mum and my 3 brothers to the library every single month, and I was obsessed with this one book. It's called The Red Necklace by Sally Gardner. It's set during the French Revolution and some of the characters have magic and there's a bit of romance in there. I used to get it out of the library all the time. But at 14 I stopped. The only thing I would read from that point for years was fanfiction. Even though I've obviously been autistic since I was born, to me my first ever hyperfixation was Sherlock, the version on BBC with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. I know it's a very original autistic hyperfixation, but I was utterly obsessed with it. However, we missed the last episode of the first season, The Great Game, while we were away on holiday in France. However, BBC iPlayer, which is the BBC's streaming service, at the time only kept shows on for 7 days after they aired. So if a show aired on Monday, it would stay on the iPlayer until the following Monday, and at midnight it would get taken off, and the next day, Tuesday, it wouldn't be on there anymore. When we got home, I had missed the episode by 1 day on iPlayer. I was absolutely devastated. However, for Christmas, my mum got me the DVD, the Series 1 DVD of Sherlock. I didn't even know they made the TV shows into DVDs at the time. I had no idea at all, and when I unwrapped it, I screamed. The Christmases since then, between me and my 3 brothers, we've received so many wonderful gifts from our amazing mum, but the only time anyone has ever screamed in sheer delight was when I got a Sherlock DVD. We watched this DVD to absolute death. Every single Sunday we'd watch an episode up until season 2 came out, then we got the season 2 DVD and we do it all again until season 3 came out. It's great, and if you're unfamiliar with Sherlock, there are only 3 episodes a season. 3 long episodes, like all 90 minutes long, but only 3. I needed more. Enter fanfiction. One of the few friends I had at high school who was in the year above me at high school introduced me to fanfiction, and honestly I didn't know what it was. I had never even heard of it before, but it definitely filled the gap I needed, combining my love of reading with my absolute adoration for all things Sherlock, and it escalated further with reading Harry Potter fanfiction because Harry Potter was also something I loved at the time, and discovering my one true love, Hermione. Which at first disgusted me. I was like, how can you divert the plot this much? Draco and Hermione, they don't even like each other. I was beyond shocked, but now they are absolutely my OTP, no matter how much one of my friends, Telly, tries to get me to convert to Drury. I'm sorry, Telly. And eventually all this reading of fanfiction culminated into the writing of fanfiction, but this video isn't really about writing, it's more about reading. And even though I eventually left high school and left all those horrible people behind, I didn't really start reading again until I was 23. Apart from the books I had to read for like my English classes and then my college classes and then my degree and then my 2 masters, I probably only read around 2 books a year. I'd say like 97% of what I would read during a year up until I was 23 was fanfiction, and it really helped with my autism burnout. So every time you pick up a new book, you have this whole new world and whole new characters and plot to get used to. And while I love that about books, it's not a criticism, obviously that's what they're for, As an autistic person trying to adapt to British high school, which is not for the faint of heart, you'll know if you've been to one, it is nothing like Harry Potter. If you want a more accurate depiction, just watch the opening of the first episode of Waterloo Road and then you will get what British high school is actually like in this country. So trying to do that while also constantly being made fun of for the small parts of myself I was brave enough to show, like how much I love reading, I couldn't bring myself to keep picking up books and having to get used to the newness again and again and again whilst I was going through all of that at the same time. And I know this is very much a first world problem. Oh my god, no, she has access to all of these books but she can't bring herself to read them. I guess we gotta push world hunger to the side and help this girl instead. I know in comparison my problem is very small and very personal to me, but it was really awful for me at the time. Reading, like for a lot of people, was an escape for me. And whilst fanfiction is great, and I still read a lot of fanfiction, I still love fanfiction, I did kind of want to get back into reading again, but I just wasn't sure how to. However, all of that accidentally changed when I decided to be an idiot and did a PhD. I think a big misconception about people who have a PhD or are currently doing a PhD is that we're all mega clever. And whilst I think most people in the world in general are quite clever, they just express it in different ways, I do think most people who do a PhD, specifically those who do one right after a master's, which they did right after degree, like me, are doing it to delay adulthood. Feel free to disagree with me if that's where you are, if you're partway through a PhD or you completed one in the same way I did one. But that was certainly why I was doing a PhD, and it was why the other like 23-year-old PhD candidates I knew were doing one too. I'm not saying they were stupid, I don't think I'm stupid either. I think most people are probably capable of doing a PhD, just most people can't be bothered and they'd rather do something else. I think a lot of the younger people who do PhDs are doing it to delay adulthood in a way. With my autism, I know not everyone will feel the same depending on their experience in education, but for me, I did always feel a sense of safety within the environment of education. Even though I hated high school and I was made really bad fun of, one thing I did love about high school and just, again, education in general, was the whole routine, which is something I'm sure a lot of autistic people can relate to, whether it's like a scheduled timetable like you have in education, or your own personal routine in your daily life, or maybe at work, depending what your job is. A lot of autistic people do like having a set routine. So doing a PhD meant I got to stay for a few more years in a routine that made me feel safe, and I could maybe work out what I was actually supposed to do with my life because I didn't know. And actually I still don't really know, but I do feel less hopeless about it than I used to. However, when you are doing a PhD, you have to read a lot, and not just journal articles. For me, due to the subject of my PhD, I had to read books as well. Novels, specifically fiction novels. So my PhD explores how we can use the commentary feature of the science fiction genre to combat the stigma around suicide, psychosis and schizophrenia, specifically in Japan, which has the highest rates of institutionalized schizophrenics in the world and one of the highest rates of suicide in all OECD countries. So even if you haven't seen it, I'm sure just by mentioning suicide in Japan, you're already all aware of Logan Paul's infamous video where he films a dead body in the suicide forest in Japan. This forest, the Aokigahara forest, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly but I'm probably not, is located in the northwestern flank of Mount Fuji, and due to the kind of ground there, compasses don't work. So even if you go in there without the intent to hurt yourself, you may not actually be able to get out anyway, depending on how far you go in, whether you have a compass or not. But further than the forest, Japan does have a much larger issue with suicide and mental health more in general, but that's not really the video to discuss that either, maybe one day. But as my chosen topic, I had to read a lot of science fiction books, a lot of mental health books, and a lot of books by Japanese authors. No matter how I felt about reading and my mood towards it, I had to read in order to complete my PhD. And there were a lot of books I hated. For example, I had to read a lot of Haruki Murakami, an incredibly famous Japanese author, and I think anyone who likes his writing should probably stop reading altogether. Full offense intended. I can't stand anything he's written. And I read some stuff I really liked. One of my favourite books I found during the PhD was Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Sugimura, which I found out last week is being made into an anime, and I had no idea. I really dropped the ball with my research as soon as my thesis was submitted. My supervisor was like, oh yeah, you should keep it up, write more papers, go to conferences, and I was like, no thank you, I would really like to sleep for a decade now. But during my PhD, the more I read, the more I started to enjoy reading again, and I fell back in love with reading from 2020 to 2023, hence why the opening of this video is a lie. But it's not a complete lie, because while I didn't technically fall back in love with reading in 2024, from 2020 to 2023, I was stuck reading a lot of things I hated, like Haruki Murakami, while I finished my PhD. I only read 2 things during my PhD that weren't for my PhD, which were Graceling and Fire, both by Kristen Cashore. They're the first 2 books in what is now my favourite fantasy series, and I wanted to read more of what I wanted to, but sadly I didn't have the time. I had to wait until my PhD was over. So I had to wait. My PhD submission deadline was the 31st of December 2023. I was all done the week before Christmas and I tried to submit it, and there was a problem at the uni, because of course there was, and I couldn't actually submit it until February. But the point is, I was done by Christmas. Even though I didn't submit it right away because there was an issue, I didn't touch it again. I was done before Christmas, which meant I could allow myself to properly fall back in love with reading in 2024. It was definitely a very up and down year in terms of reading, most of which is documented on my TikTok. I am very picky and only gave out like 7 5-stars and also some 0 stars. But even though I didn't like everything I read, and I know I never will like absolutely everything I read, it hasn't made me fall out of love with reading. I still love reading now, and even though I hate all of what I went through back in high school and all the reasons that made me stop reading, I'm really happy I managed to fall back in love with it thanks to my PhD. Although admittedly it was a very expensive, time-consuming, exhausting way to get back into reading and to fall back in love with it. But I am also a doctor now, so it was absolutely worth it. So that's it. That's how I fell back in love with reading in 2024. Sort of.